So the Labour Party had announced that they were going to look into introducing citizens' assemblies as a way of exploring various kind of constitutional changes in British politics. And for those of you who don't know, kind of a citizens' assembly, the idea is almost like a jury. For some big changes in recent British political history, particularly if we look at Brexit being the sort of go-to example, we've relied on referenda, right? So these big votes where everyone in the country votes yes or no on a certain proposition, such as with remaining or leaving the European Union. The goal of referendums is that it gives everyone a say in a much more direct way on a given big topic. For most of our politics, we rely on representative politicians who go to Parliament sort of to represent us, kind of in our place, to, in theory at least, vote on topics in ways that they think their constituents, the people who have voted them, would like them to. Obviously, in practice, that is much more complicated. And so referenda have sometimes been used as this way of going, look, this is a really big issue, like the UK's membership of the European Union. This is a really big issue. We think people should have a much more direct say in this than with issues where we've got politicians that are kind of mediating between the people and the writing of laws. The challenge in that lies in the fact that referenda tend to take issues which might be really complex, and the way they've been done in the UK at least has tended to be that there is a yes vote or a no vote. So it's a very binary choice. There is not necessarily lots of different options, which isn't always the case, doesn't have to be the case. And obviously you could do a referendum with some ranked choice voting or single transferable vote on different topics, whatever. But they often serve to make an issue more of a dividing line rather than less. They rarely serve to embrace the complexity of an issue, because what you do is you have one set of campaign groups set up to make arguments for the proposition. You have one group of set of campaign groups set up to argue against it, and all kind of genuine debate kind of fizzles out for people to make kind of the most extreme arguments possible. So citizens' assemblies are meant to be a kind of alternative to that, in that there is the same goal of trying to include people more directly in policy making, in constitutional change, in sort of big issues, but in a way that doesn't rely on turning whatever the topic in question is into this kind of big debate in quite the same way. So the broad outline of how this is meant to work is essentially that it's a bit like a jury. We've kind of decided that a good way to decide on whether someone is guilty or not when they're accused of a crime is that, we don't do a referendum where everyone votes on whether that is true or not. What we do is that we randomly select 12 people from the general public, and we sort of use those as a representation of the population at large, and we ask them to deliberate on whether this person is guilty or not guilty. And so the idea behind a citizens' assembly is like, what if we did the same thing, but for kind of like political topics? Particularly in cases where there is the potential for a sort of complex topic to be turned into something really simplistic and hard and divisive. Can we get probably more than 12? Can we get like 50 people, for example, from the general public, bring them together, have experts come in to give them lots of advice and context and guidance and expert opinion and statistics and all of this from differing sides of the debate about what might happen, and to kind of embrace the complexity of it, and also to deliberate as well, right? That it's not just someone places all this evidence in front of them and then they vote. They also get to debate it. It is interesting to see the Labour Party adopting this as part of its platform. In some ways, this is kind of like a novel intervention rather than just having more referendums on big topics, etc., and is an acknowledgement that we are facing big challenges in terms of housing, in terms of the climate, in terms of our politics with the House of Lords. On the other hand, it feels like very much something that, given the gravity of all of those issues, that it's a way of not just solving the problem and kind of creating a committee to found the commission to choose the participants in the etc. etc. This is one of those things that feels like there is a very well-intentioned version of this and that it possibly could be done well. But I think the reason that Keir Starmer and team are potentially proposing it, although this article also suggests that they've backtracked on it already. It feels like the reason that they're keen to do this is this fear of making bad decisions, and that if you can say that you've brought people on board to have these citizens' assemblies, you can sort of say that you've listened to people, and if other people don't like it, you can be like, well, no, we invited all these people and they all did like the particular way in which we've decided to reform the House of Lords, or they did agree to the particular places in which we're building lots of new houses. The challenge is that anyone who disagrees with it probably isn't going to go, oh, well, that's okay then. What they're probably going to do is just go, oh, well, it was the wrong people that you invited to have those assemblies. And that might be some truth in that, right? It could be that the way in which the assembly was put together ended up being constituted too much of Labour voters or Conservative voters or whoever else. You can easily see people going, well, look, these are the experts that you invited to present information to this assembly on, and criticising it in that way, right? If you do a climate one, there are going to be people that will complain that, I don't know, like a think tank like the Global Warming Policy Foundation, which is a climate denialist think tank, if they don't get invited to present to the assembly, they're going to complain about that and say that it's a politically biased process, etc., 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 right? And so I don't think it solves that part of the problem. And I think what it kind of ends up being is, many of you will be quite aware of the idea of a focus group. So the Labour Party has for a long time been obsessed with using focus groups to pitch their policies. Rather than the Labour Party, or indeed any political party that's taking this approach, rather than putting together a plan for how to fix the country's or the world's problems and then setting out to convince voters that that plan is the right one, which they should select and going to be the most effective, etc. Instead, what's happening is that you have a political party which is constantly sort of running ideas past focus groups to find out how they're likely to be received, and then anything that fits outside of what voters are already expecting gets thrown out as not a viable policy. And so you end up in a situation where you don't get new ideas introduced, because generally speaking, people are going to be a bit hostile or skeptical towards completely new ideas. And you have a situation where, because those ideas are being run past a focus group before they're presented like as a potential policy, no one ever gets the opportunity to fight for them, right? And so I think the challenge lies in the fact that do these citizens' assemblies just become focus groups by another name? As well as all these kind of logistical questions in terms of who gets picked, which experts get picked to come in and give evidence, etc., etc., etc. Like, how does the voting system works? So that's like one challenge, but there's also the stuff of, does this become focus groups by another name? Particularly given that we are in a position where the Labour Party is going to have this massive majority. They are going to have the power to just solve these various problems that the country currently has. And this feels like a way for them to not feel like they have to use that power and to have an excuse for why they're not going to really do much whilst they're in power. And there's also, like, alongside that obsession with focus groups, there's also this aspect of centrist kind of obsession with process over actually doing something, rather than just solving the problem and therefore having to stick your neck on the line and go, this is the thing we believe and this is how we think this thing should be solved. Instead, you end up in a situation where you're going, well, I've set up a committee to look at that, and you're able to just push off responsibility.